speaker. Speaker would be better?
Yeah. Like a little pocket microphone?
I've got some props that are going to jump up here and carry on the conversation, so I've got to have them ready. Thanks for attending and thanks for coming to the conference. Really glad that the organizers had such a great facility, and I'm glad to be here. I've not spoke on a topic like this before. Usually it's the scientific method, but I'm trying to persuade people to keep the scientific method in mind when they finish a study. It's about stories, and I'm going to focus more on written stories. And there's a heritage, I say. I guess that's the next slide, getting ahead of myself. But written stories are always idealized as the guy that's writing a report, the woman that's writing a report, has to wad up the paper, throw it away, get mad, and come back at a better time. And I guess that's just the way our brain works, is I want to start over again. But there's another kind of story that this organization called fishstories.org accommodates. And if you look them up on the internet, they welcome you to give a verbal story, and you can vary it off any direction you want as long as you don't insult somebody. So if you have a good fish story and you want it to be archived, go to this other place. So my purpose is to encourage you to go the full route with completing a study and get a report, get it completed to some level, and make sure it's archived so it's not lost. The rewards that I refer to at the bottom of the slide are an experience I had this past year. I worked on a report called Fishes of New York, Northern New York and the Adirondacks, and I got it published in the Northeastern Naturalist. It defied a lot of rules, or I went across a lot of boundaries I didn't think I would go to. I don't have an employer any longer since I'm retired from DEC, where I was for 39 years, and now I'm appointed as an adjunct at SUNY Potsdam, which I'm really glad for, but they aren't going to pay for a report like this. It was going to cost $1,400 to be the online version, digital version, and it wasn't that hard to pay for it, $1,100 out of pocket. So I encourage you to not be turned away entirely when you have to put money up front. It's just the way publishing works today. If you aren't employed, you still need to get your reports somewhere that they can be retrieved. And so that was quite a gratification for me, that the response I've got, follow-up telling me, people telling me that they were glad to see the report. And I was sure glad to get it done also. Being retired, I could really focus on it like I wouldn't have been able to while I was employed. So the idea that writing is part of our heritage, I did a report on Lake Champlain, and back in the 1700s, how the Native Americans were where they were and the Europeans were where they were. And the written record just doesn't exist for most Native Americans north of Mexico, maybe. They have their oral history, and that works fine. Other cultures, maybe European and Asian, have been in written histories for a long time. And I think we bring that, maybe that's in our genes a little bit, but I get terrific gratification from writing at the end of a study and pulling things together so that I can have more insight and pass that on to somebody else. So I hope writing is not bad-mouthed within your mental framework, that you can find time to get it done. And sometimes it requires that you work in the evenings or on the weekends. For this presentation, I interviewed about half a dozen professionals, and John Waldman helped me say, being a professional is a 24-hour job. You wake up at night sometimes, you can't go back to sleep, so you do some writing, or you think about your writing and you take a few notes. And I sure spend some nights without sleeping all night and get up to do something. The last comment about these archived reports will live beyond the person, and it's so valuable that they can still be retrieved, but it's the job that it is to get it done. Communication comes in so many different forms. Verbal is kind of instinctive for us, and writing is a little more awkward maybe. And I'm trying to reflect back on the part of our society that's not so communicative with the written word. In fact, they are really embarrassed by their spelling, and they tell oral stories, or they tell, like to this fishstories.com, and I got such great information about moon eyes this past year by talking to fishermen. One of them, Joey Parker, would send me text messages, and have you heard the word salad? So the way that the apps just mix up all the things and put decimals everywhere, I couldn't figure out what he was trying to tell me. But he's a great guy, and he knows the water of Black Lake, St. Lawrence County so well. I got lots of good information from him. And then the other awkwardness I think that we're confronted by, and the reality that we're in this transition phase from things being printed and being digital, our communications with others, as it's often in a text message, just doesn't do the job lots of times, the back and forth conversation. And we have to work at getting our message communicated. Coming to a meeting like this gives us so much more insight to people's intentions than the Zoom meetings or virtual things. So just have to work at making sure you get the kind of communication you need. But what story is suitable for publishing? And the colorful fish, the odd fish, particularly large or small, might be warranted for a special note that gets stored somewhere. Is this this fish of primitive fossilization, is that a familiar name to many people, Dunkeloscius? Some of those who have children with the Pokemon, it's been quite popularized, maybe as much as Tyrannosaurus Rex. And the bottom picture, I don't know what story that would go with, but I just couldn't pass it up. And what things keep you from getting your report done? Distractions of the workplace, you have the telephone. Well, this guy looks like he went to the library, but he's still having a good dose of caffeine. So where do you get help from? My success in getting some reports completed were very dependent upon a colleague, Bob Daniels from the State Museum, who just came along and took my report and said, I'll rewrite it for you and we'll get it done. And the Fish Atlas came out of that, and a couple other reports that he helped me with. So I strongly encourage you to find a colleague to help you get your report over the fence. In this most recent one, I conned my daughter, Jane, into helping, since she's such a good scientific writer. And having a colleague on the author line often pushes you a little further and makes you less inclined to abandon the report when you get to those barriers that seem hard to get across. Artificial intelligence, I talked with Young Chin about the journal that he's the editor for, the Canadian Journal of Aquatic Science. And he said that, like a college professor anywhere, has to be able to make sure the reports that he gets haven't been contrived. And of course, there are many ways that you can use artificial intelligence. I guess if you give it the basics of where you're going with it and they would just improve your language, that's probably not a bad deal. But if it don't have the science worked into it that you've had in your experiment, it's a bogus report, of course. And the bottom, about helping others who might be encouraged along, if you can just help them get their report further advanced. About everything's going to end up digital, and the different online sources that you can get reports. The Nature Conservancy has some outstanding reports. I was really pleased to see this Fishes of New England proper on their webpage, and it's not peer-reviewed, I guess you would say. It's labeled as draft, but I think it's as good as any published book, and so people are resorting to all these different ways of getting to the end product. The American Fisheries Society, of course, is the upper tier peer review, and it's really, to my opinion, close to impossible to succeed at something like that unless you're better trained than I. My master's training gave me a real good appreciation for writing and getting things in the right order, but I find these major journals not a good starting point for people early in their career, and going to things like, well, what used to be the New York Fish and Game Journal, or Checklist is quite a odd little journal that's mostly not American, from some other, Brazil maybe it's from, but it accepts articles at kind of the going rate of about $1,000. And then ResearchGate is quite an interesting, what's the right word here, social network that you can put your reports there. You can call it a progress report, and when people do a Google search, up pops your study topic, and you can have greater exposure to other people doing that same kind of work. The easiest kind of report you can have would be on a fish label, goes to perhaps the New York State Museum or to the iNaturalist. The science blog of our chapter website is an excellent place to pass news along to others. And then I have about 3 minutes maybe to try to interact with you folks as to what you think of this is bogus, and what maybe you would suggest for young professionals trying to find a place to get their reports archived. I thought I'd put some friends out in the audience that would have some questions for me, so not being sure that would work out, I came up with a couple questions. Okay, who amongst you, let me ask this one first, then I'll come back, has submitted a manuscript to a journal with peer review? You've done that. You've said it. How many have sent a manuscript in? Okay, close to half maybe. And amongst you, who has had the manuscript rejected not once, not twice, and you had, not once and twice, but you had the tenacity to go a third time, and then it was accepted on the third submittal? Oh, terrific. Look at that. So the students realize it's not easy on the first throw. As I've been told in some of my rejected manuscripts, you've got to find the right journal. And that might mean that they're easier, or it might mean that you just haven't applied to the right journal. They have too much of a worldwide scope or a methodology, including statistics or genetics, and you just don't have that. One question before that's it. I'd like to get some audience participation.
College website, we'll talk about that. They'll post reports on their website for about different colleges.
For which organization? Yes, so some of the colleges, SUNY Brockport also has a destination that the staff can put their reports so they're archived. So it's kind of an in-house thing, but once you make it accessible, people can find out about it and retrieve it. So SUNY Oneonta is an excellent, they're called their field station, their auxiliary field station has a series for students and faculty. So I'll finish up here. I've got a fish story if I can get it squeezed in, but first I have to credit others who helped me, particularly those last 5 people. And as I said, this is a new territory for me to try to lecture to people and tell you got to do more. But I think it's, with this transition into so much digital part of our life, we need to shift our behaviors a little bit. And if I've got a minute?
1 minute.
Oh, good. So my fish story, which I was urged to develop when a newspaper person wanted to develop a story about this northern fishes. I searched my memory, and this instance of where I was in an Adirondack lake called Little Moose. There's 2 Little Mooses. This is the one furthest to the east. We knew that these suckers were coming into the tributary to spawn, and then you have to be there on the right day. We arrived. I walked there at 6 in the morning, and I hear this thrashing sound in the water. There were thousands of fish trying to get up this little tributary, no more than 6 feet wide. The males were at the higher tier. Each tier was about 12 inches above the next. And for some pheromone, it was all separated out. The most colorful males were on top. And then we set a trap net, and we caught over 1,000 of these small suckers in the trap net, and it was awesome. Thank you.